Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar titled Teaching Black and Latino Males in Education. We're going to discuss the findings from a national study of exemplar teachers. My name is Dr. Bridget Herron. I am proud to serve as the director for the Center for Organizational Responsibility and Advancement, who has the pleasure of sponsoring today's webinar. I'm going to start by introducing Dr. Luke Wood, who will be providing the majority of the information that we're going to review today. Dr. Wood is an associate professor in the College of Education at San Diego State University and co-director of the National Research and Practice Center called M2C3. He also works with Dr. Frank Harris, who was a partner in this research and a partner in the development of the program that we will be discussing today. M2C3 partners with educational institutions across the nation to support their capacity in advancing outcomes for boys, young men, and men of color. Their research examines factors that influence the success, learning, and development of males of color in education, with a specific focus on Black and Latino males. Collectively, their work has been featured by media outlets, including Diverse Issues in Higher Education, Huffington Post, The Hechinger Report, The New York Times, KPBS, CNN, the National Press Club, the Chronicle of Higher Education, and most recently by the White House Initiative on Educational Excellence for African Americans. Dr. Wood has delivered over 120 scholarly, professional, and conference presentations and has authored over 100 publications, including 6 co-authored books, 6 edited books, and more than 60 peer-reviewed journal articles. His most recent book is titled Advancing Black Male Student Success from Preschool through PhD and is co-edited with Dr. Sean Harper. Dr. Wood is a former recipient of the Sally Casanova Pre-Doctoral Fellowship, from which he served as a research fellow at Stanford University. So without further ado, Dr. J. Luke Wood.
Thank you, Dr. Herron. Welcome, everyone, and glad you are here. We are looking forward to sharing with you information about what we've learned from this new study that we've conducted on teaching boys and young men of color in education with a focus on Black and Latino males. To provide some context for our conversation today, I'm going to overview some brief challenges that we know are facing our young males of color as a way to providing context for our discussion. Challenges facing males of color in education have been well documented, and these challenges in school mirror those challenges that we see in wider society in terms of the healthcare industry, the criminal justice system, employment, and housing. We know that many schools and nonprofit organizations have responded by creating conferences, symposia, mentoring programs, professional development series, and numerous other strategies to try and support and advance outcomes for this population. In the scholarly community, we know that there's been numerous books, book chapters, peer-reviewed articles, all kinds of different products really focused on trying to explicate what's taking place with this population. In response to this kind of flurry of activity, in 2013, the Obama administration created the My Brother's Keeper initiative. Many of you may be familiar with this initiative, which set out to address persistent opportunity gaps faced by boys and young men of color. And one of the things that we know is important about this initiative is that 4 of the 6 milestones or objectives for this initiative focus on education, including school readiness for early childhood education, grade level reading proficiency, rates of high school graduation, college going, and completion of post-secondary education and training. We know that this is important given that education has long served as a pathway for upward social and economic mobility for communities that have been historically disadvantaged. And here are some data that help us to illustrate why it is important to have this focus on education. On your screen, you'll see data from the National Assessment of Educational Progress regarding student success in reading, and you can see reading proficiency rates for 4th graders. If you total the percentage of those who are at a proficient or advanced, we can see that while 42% of white male students are proficient in reading, only 15% of Black males and 19% of Latino males are. On the left-hand side of the chart, we can also identify those students who are below basic level, and we can see that the largest bars are for Black, Hispanic, Latino, and Native American boys at 54%, 49%, and 53%. The patterns that we see in fourth grade, we know they continue. And actually, some scholars have referred to this as an accumulation of disadvantage that takes place over time. By eighth grade, only 10% of Black males are proficient in reading. For Latino boys, we can see that only 17% are proficient or above. These rates of 17% and 10% are juxtaposed with 35% of white male eighth graders who are at proficient or above. We know that patterns that are seen in reading are also evident in math. On your screen now, you see NAEP data for math scores for fourth graders. In fourth grade, we know that only 18% of Black males are at proficient or above, and 28% of Latino males are, in comparison to 52% of white males. Just like in reading, these patterns are exacerbated over time. In eighth grade, these patterns continue with only 12% of Black males at proficient and 20% of Latino males. Collectively, these data for both math and reading demonstrate that there are incredible challenges facing our boys and young men of color. Given these trends, it's not surprising that Black and Latino males are underrepresented in advanced schooling experiences such as gifted education, advanced placement, honors, dual enrollment, and IB courses. Beyond these rates, we also know there are other challenges often facing our boys and young men of color. One of those being exposure to exclusionary discipline. Exclusionary discipline refers to disciplinary practices that remove males of color from learning environments, thereby restricting their opportunities for success. I can personally identify with this experience. And while I was in sixth grade, I was suspended more times for more days than I was actually in school. And in terms of school suspension rate, we see that this experience is common. Data from the Schott Foundation demonstrates that while only 5% of white males in K-12 received out-of-school suspensions, 7% of Latino males did, and 15% of Black males did. 15% in comparison to these other groups. Moreover, these boys and young men are also more likely to be exposed to expulsions, with Latino males being 1.4 times more likely than white males to be expelled, and Black males being 3 times more likely to be expelled than their white male peers. 3 times. I'm also very concerned about what's taking place in early childhood education, and we know that these patterns begin early on. In fact, a recent report was released by the American Federation of Teachers, and they found that in that report that while Black students, both male and female, account for 18% of the preschool population, they account for 42% of those who were suspended once and 48% of those who were suspended more than once. Yes, these are rates for preschool. By every conceivable marker, we know that there's other challenges facing these populations. Grade retention, graduation, persistence in higher education. Boys and young men of color often just don't benefit from the same types of experiences and outcomes as their other males. According to data from the Schott Foundation, you can see on your slide, 78% of white males will graduate in a 4-year time frame from high school, in comparison to 58% of Latino males and only 52% of Black males. So enough about these challenges. I think we're all very much aware of the concerns that are evident for this population. And so for us, what's important to recognize is that we have to do something about this. And we also think it's important to approach this work from a systems perspective. We oftentimes use the quote that you see on your screen. It's from W. Edward Deming and Paul Batalden. And it says that every system is perfectly designed to achieve the results it gets. Every system is perfectly designed to achieve the results that it gets. We advocate bringing this thinking and critical perspective down to a more personal level that helps to demonstrate the role that we have as parts of the system. So we like to say that every district, every school, every grade level, and every classroom are perfectly designed to achieve the results that they get. So from a systems perspective, when we see the widespread challenges facing our students, we must consider how the system itself and we as parts of that system are facilitating those outcomes. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Herring to provide you with some more information. But one thing that I want to say is that through all the research that we've done and all the partnerships that we have with schools and colleges and universities, we have learned one very important thing. Educators as a whole are woefully unprepared to work with these populations. And we believe that there is a need for programming and development opportunities that better prepares educators to engage boys and young men of color, in particular, Black and Latino males. And so we're going to provide you with some recommendations on how to do that as contextualized within a program that we've created that Dr. Herring will talk about.
Thank you, Dr. Wood. So I want to start by couching our program in our philosophy and how we developed this program and how we deliver it on campuses, both through K-12 all the way through community college. We have three key philosophies. First is teachers and educators are key. We believe that teachers and educators are the tip of the spear and have the greatest chance to impact students, as they are the ones in contact with students more than anyone else on campus. Teachers are among those school professionals who are most readily positioned to affect change. And we believe that this is primarily due to the learning structures that enable teachers to interact with students more often than other school educators. And they pose the greatest opportunity to enhance outcomes for these males. Second, while some teachers perceive that due to their racial or ethnic affiliation that they may not be able to be effective in teaching boys and young men of color, we want to make it explicitly clear that all educators can teach Black and Latino males. And third, and perhaps most important, is that we also believe that the strategies that work for males of color will often, and perhaps more than often, work for all students. So we are not proposing strategies that we believe will in any way affect other students negatively. We think that these strategies are good for all students, and that boys and young men of color will see the greatest impact from the use of these types of strategies. So I want to introduce you to the program that we developed, which again is all supported by and built upon the foundation of the research that Dr. Wood and Dr. Harris have done, looking at exemplar educators throughout the nation, working with boys and men of color. And the program is an online certificate program, and with the key idea of enhancing the capacity of educators to work with these boys and young men of color. The features of the program include a 1 week long program that's fully online. It includes live interactive dialogues with content experts, including the developers of the program, Dr. Wood and Dr. Harris. In addition, we provide through this training tangible solutions for real challenges, of which you're going to see some today during the webinar. And we're able to go into further depth during the training of some of those tangible solutions and provide practical and applicable examples that can be used in the classroom immediately following the training. Some additional features of the program are that it has an e-learning, videos, virtual discussion boards, and real-time conferencing and practical readings. I'm going to show you the modules that were developed around the National Exemplar Study. These modules will be, and in addition to what you're going to learn today, we'll go into more in depth and delve deeper into these the constructs that we're going to discuss today. The workshop and the training is separated into 5 modules: factors necessitating enhanced teaching and learning strategies for boys and young men of color, which provides context for the training; theoretical and epistemological foundations for teaching Black and Latino males; building relationships with boys and young men of color; teaching and learning strategies for Black and Latino males; classroom management and disciplinary techniques. And again, all of these modules and the whole training is based on the exemplar study that we will be discussing in further detail today. To give you an idea of what the course looks like, the course format, again, it's broken up into 5 days or 5 modules. Most of the activities are asynchronous and can be completed at the learner's own pace and own convenience, with the exception of those live sessions. So here is a screenshot from one of our modules, the factors necessitating enhanced learning. And when you click on the module, you can see the various activities and instructional guides that are available for this module. So we see the videos, the readings, in addition to the guidebook, which is part of the Teaching Boys and Young Men of Color series. There are additional scholarly readings, discussion boards, and an assessment of learning that will allow the learner to reflect on the information provided in the module. Here we see a shot of the videos that are available in the module. Each video is pre-recorded and has a full transcript available and is fully accessible for all learners. And then the last is the supplemental readings. Again, here is an example of various readings that we have available in one of our trainings that relate to young men of color. Another aspect of the training that has been found to be extremely beneficial for participants is the ability to share knowledge and questions and reflect on the content across individual participants. And we allow this through this discussion forum. And here you can see an example of participants engaging in the discussion forum. And then the next slide, we see an example of the assessment that is done to help learners reflect on the work that is available. And then last, we see our wonderful faculty developers who developed both a community college certificate training program and the K-12 training program that we are talking about today, Dr. Harris and Dr. Wood. This is a live session, and we have 2 live sessions in each of the training modules that typically happen in module 3 and in module 5. And they're 1 hour long, and we've received tremendous positive feedback regarding the live sessions. So we're going to talk in a little bit more detail about how to access that training and how to make that a training available to educators on your campus, your colleagues, a little bit later, but we're going to go back to Dr. Wood so he can share the findings from the national study.
Thank you, Dr. Herron. So as Dr. Herron noted, this program focuses on these different elements of teaching young men, boys in K-12 education. And we also have a community college program as well. And so what we want to do is really talk to you about what we found. Our goal here is to really provide you with some insight into strategies that work with this population. These strategies are based upon our own research, which has focused long and hard on teaching boys, young men, and men of color in education. And what we're going to do is highlight strategies in 3 areas: relationship building, teaching and learning, and then, of course, classroom management and discipline. So let's go ahead and jump in. So this is how one of the features of the course, and one of the features of our work is reaching out to educators who are engaged in the field, who are having success with this population and having a better understanding of what they're doing that is being successful. So, we've started out with challenges and barriers in talking about this webinar. So now we want to focus on solutions and recommendations for practice. So last year, we conducted a study of teachers who had a proven record of success in teaching boys, particularly Black and Latino boys and young men, from preschool to high school. And we refer to these teachers as exemplar teachers. The full range of the findings are published in this peer-reviewed book that you see here on your screen titled Teaching Boys and Young Men of Color. And we're going to give you some of the strategies that are gleaned from this actual guidebook. The teachers who had at least 3 years of experience in the classroom and had a demonstrated track record of success in teaching males of color based upon measurable outcomes were nominated by their school principals to participate in the study. A total of 216 teachers participated, and they provided narratives of success that they had in response to structured prompts. These teachers were recruited from 6 states that had the nation's highest concentration of populations of color, including California, Florida, Georgia, New York, North Carolina, and Texas. These states are, of course, also recognized for their extensive cultural, political, and geographic diversity as well. And so as a result, we feel that the strategies offered are applicable to multiple other contexts. So a total of 35 recommendations are extended in the guidebook itself. Many more recommendations are actually covered in the actual program. So let's go ahead and dive in and begin with some relationship building strategies. So one of the things that we know are as important is relationships. In fact, we have found in our work that relationships are a critical precondition to effective teaching and learning practices, meaning it doesn't matter how good you teach. It doesn't matter how good you design your class, how good you design your curriculum, how good you execute it. If you don't have a relationship with the students and their families, you will not be as successful. So prior to considering any relationship with family members, we think it's important to consider internally how we view them. So on this slide, you'll see some recommendations here, and I'm going to highlight a couple of them. But the first thing is we want educators to recognize it's important to know that family members want the best for their children. We must then move about establishing connections with the family, maintaining constant contact with them, with families' permission being intrusive into the home context, whether that's the actual physical home or into the home lives of students, and demonstrate high expectations for the students. So let's take the first one, recognize that families want the best. We found in the study that it's common for educators to harbor deficit perspectives that blame students, their families, and their communities for academic challenges. We know that some educators make judgments about family members and students, believing that students don't care and neither do their families. These perspectives are often held unconsciously, though some educators, of course, do hold them consciously. But we know that they can greatly influence in a negative way of how educators interact with their family members. A study conducted by Sean Harper and his associates in 2014 focused on high school males, involved 500 interviews with Black and Latino high school males. Families regularly conveyed the importance of education. That was one of the key findings from the study, was that family members regularly conveyed the importance of education. They found that these messages began at an early age, even in cases where family members themselves had not fulfilled their educational goals. They emphasized the importance of school. In expressing this point, Harper and his associates stated, participants did not mistake their parents' educational pathway as disregard for the value of formal schooling. It was the opposite instead. They knew parents wanted them and their siblings to be better educated, struggle less, and have higher status in jobs that offer respectable and financial security. So it's important for us to begin with any approach with these families and recognizing that they do indeed want the best for their children. The next thing it's important to do is to demonstrate high expectations for the youth when dealing with the families. So when engaging with family members, educators must convey positive messages about the students that demonstrates high expectations for them. This is important because low expectations will be viewed as uncaring and will serve as a natural barrier for building relationships typified by trust, mutual respect, and authentic care. Remember here that for this population, all messages will be filtered through family members' own encounters with racial and gender stereotypes in school settings. And we know that the experiences of Black and Latino families, oftentimes that will result in a very cautious view of educators and schooling practices. As a result, it's important to convey high expectations for student performance. This strategy becomes even more critical when the communication from parents includes feedback that addresses behavioral or performance corrections. So let me give you an example of what that means. When you're in a situation where you actually need to correct what's taking place in the classroom with the student, and you have to address behavior or you have to address performance, we need to be careful about the actual language that we use with the students. Oftentimes, you might hear an educator say to a parent, Alex is standing up during circle time, or Terrence is not paying attention in class. Instead, we think it's important to embed positive messaging whenever you're doing any critique. So instead, you would say, Alex is a great listener. We just need to work on staying seated during circle time, but tomorrow is another opportunity. Or, Terrence has so much to offer in the class contributions. We had some rough spots today with his attention, but when he's fully focused, his contributions are powerful, so we still need to work on that. This is important messaging because it allows the family member to hear the message without shutting down. Altogether, these strategies highlight the importance, again, of building trust, mutual respect, and authentic care, and being intrusive with the parents. In terms of building relationships with students, we think it's important to think about the strategies here. One, we think it's important to refer to them by name, and not just by name in terms of just saying, hey, you, or whatever. You have to actually refer to them by their actual name. You have to know how to pronounce their name correctly, because oftentimes when we hear from young men of color and boys of color, their names are pronounced incorrectly, and you have to know the name that they go by. I was doing an observation recently where I had a student who was being it was a young boy actually in preschool who was the teacher was saying that he's not paying attention, he's not listening to me. Whenever I give him directives, he's not responding. And I asked what the teacher was calling him, and his legal name was Jonathan, but he went by Mark. And so as a result, the teacher was calling him by a name that he didn't recognize. So it's important to be able to know those things about students, what they prefer to be called. We have to learn about them and their lives, but we have to do so with interest. If there's no interest there, then they're not going to believe that we really care about what they're saying to us. We have to be fully present during conversations. One of the things that we know is that as educators, we have multiple hats that we wear. We're teaching classes with our students. We're in meetings with our peers. There's so many things that are on our plate. And so it's important that whenever we're dealing with students and whenever we're dealing with their families, that we have to be fully present during those conversations. One thing that we like to say is this: it's more important to be fully present for a short conversation than to be multitasking during the long conversation. We also think it's important to have regular check-ins with students and appropriate disclosing. Disclosing was actually one of the common strategies that were discussed by the exemplar teachers in the study. Disclosing involves revealing personal information about oneself to build rapport. In this case, it involves teachers appropriately revealing personal information that allows them to build levels of trust and care with the students. Teachers repeatedly noted the benefits of sharing personal life struggles and successes, and they said that this was a mechanism for breaking down walls and discussing the benefits of being focused and driven towards one's dreams. One of the things that they discussed was this helped them to humanize the relationship between them and the student, and allowing the student to see them as simply more relatable. Some teachers noted that being vulnerable in front of students allowed for the students to feel more comfortable in opening up with them. This was seen as a critical pathway for fostering authentic conversations as well as trust. Teachers also noted that disclosing can actually be a motivational tool as well, as students see someone who has experienced struggles and overcome those struggles in achieving success. Now, one really, really important caveat here is that we cannot make statements of equivalency, such as my struggle is like yours, or I have struggled too, or in any way dismiss the unique realities and challenges faced by boys and young men of color. Instead, our goal is to be relatable and provide them with motivation by discussing challenges that we face without making any statements of equivalency. Other strategies that we recommend for building relationships with males include being real and down to earth. In fact, when students talk about having trust with teachers, these are actually the words they use to convey what they mean by trust. Being real, having real conversations with them, being down to earth, being approachable. We know that motivational messaging is important. We know that it's important to foster a welcomeness for them to engage with us, rather than assuming that the preconditions for them to engage with us are already there. And so we think that these are important strategies. So let's talk a little bit about motivational messaging, and then I'll come back to some of these other strategies. So motivational messaging is important for countering the numerous challenges that students face. When we look at the national landscape, we know that boys of color and young men of color are under attack. Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Tamir Rice, these are names that have become ingrained in the psyche of conversation at the national level because of the pervasive view of young men and boys of color that they are criminals and unintelligent. As a result, motivational messages are necessary for countering these perspectives. In in the study, teachers talked about a number of different motivational messages that they believed were important for ensuring that the relationships with students would actually counter the messages that they've received from society about themselves, as well as from other educators about basically their realistic horizons for them. So we know that some types of messages are important that include validation. So validation includes those messages conveyed to students that you can do it, you can succeed, I believe in you, you're smart, you're great, you deserve the best, you're a person of great value. These messages are important. One of the things that we've learned from this study, though, is that while validating messages are important, it's even more important when they're organized around specific activities. So saying to a student, you did really great on this, or great job on this. It's really important for us to do that. Messages about work ethic are also important. Messages about work ethic that note the importance of hard work, determination, persistence, and perseverance, telling students to keep pushing, that hard work pays off. Now, this is, of course, comes with the caveat, because it should be done while acknowledging that these students face barriers that others will not, and trying to avoid negating the unique realities, again, of these young men. Resilience are another type of messages that students need to hear. Recognizing barriers and telling students that they have the ability to succeed in the face of these barriers. So some of the messages that teachers recommended that they gave was, it's not how you fall down, but how you pick yourself up. Or education is the most powerful weapon you possess. Or we live in a prejudicial world, but that's not a reason to fail. Messages about control can also be important for males. We have to think about, when we're talking about boys and young men of color, that masculinity and masculine identity is involved. And we know that boys and young men are oftentimes socialized to perceive that having control is important. So telling them that they have control over their academic futures and life is important. Telling them messages like knowledge is power, or failing is not an option, or telling them, hey, what is in control? Well, your education. We also know that messages about positive futures are important. And this is really critical, because we know that these are some of the messages that they tell us, especially when we're talking about high school young men, that are important for them to continue in school. They tell us that these are the most important motivational messages for them. So telling them messages such as, you will go to college someday, or you can create a better life for yourself and your family, or envision your future. So these messages about future directions are very important. Other messages that we know that they need to hear simply are just those that honor them and their dignity and give them respect. Fostering a welcomeness to engage is also something that educators talked about in the study. And we know that this is important because we assume in many cases that students feel welcome to engage in the classroom. And we've learned from our work that based upon racial and gender stereotypes that they don't feel that way. Oftentimes what they tell us is that teachers will ask questions in class and they may even know the answer, but they won't raise their hand. Or that teachers will say, hey, does anyone have any questions? But they won't respond, even if they know that they need to receive help. And we ask them why that is. And they tell us that it's because they're worried that the teachers will think that they're dumb, unintelligent, and stupid. And as a result, there's an apprehension to engage in the classroom. And so we have to create an environment where they feel welcome to engage. Part of this includes avoiding an approach me first or prove yourself first stance. As educators, we oftentimes have our go-to students, those students who, when we ask a question, raise their hand, who seem the most studious or who seem the most involved in what we're doing. But oftentimes, because of societal messages that have told men of color that they're viewed as criminals and that they're unintelligent, they're apprehensive to have those interactions with their educators. So what happens is, because educators have an approach me first or prove yourself first stance, and because students have an apprehension to engage based upon racial and gender messages they receive, the two groups never meet in the middle. It's also important to avoid unintentional micro-messaging, which deals with messages that are microaggressions. And if you're unfamiliar with that, we can use the Q&A time to address what microaggression messages are. Culturally relevant pedagogy in terms of teaching and learning practices was something that was regularly discussed by the educators. In fact, it was one of the most pervasive recommendations. And this includes basically taking the content that's being taught in the course, taking the delivery and making it relevant to the lives and realities of students. This is important. As noted by Gloria Ladson-Billings, culturally relevant pedagogy, it empowers students intellectually, socially, emotionally, and politically by using what we call cultural reference to impart knowledge, skills, and attitudes. And it was, again, one of the things that educators noted about in the study that was important. They told us that culturally relevant pedagogy in terms of the course materials and in terms of the course delivery makes the course material more meaningful, easier to understand. It increases student engagement. It connects students to classroom learning, and it creates a better sense of belonging in that classroom environment. Culturally relevant pedagogy can take place in numerous forms. Some of it deals with a historical context. You know, when you're talking about a given topic in class, connecting it to the lives and cultures of the students who are there. Now, one of the things we know is important about this is that oftentimes the kind of go-to examples that educators have are examples that deal with slavery and the civil rights movement. Now, while those are important things for us to refer to, they are rooted in subjugation. So what we recommend is not just focusing on those, but really trying to pull from other areas and other historical things that they might not be fully aware of. We think this is important because it can have more of an asset-based approach to cultural relevancy. We also think it's important to connect it to the contemporary lives and realities of students by looking at things that are in popular media as it relates to folks who are in business and scientists and politicians and other individuals who may look and sound and have similar experiences as them. We also know it's important to aggressively address stereotypes about these students. One of the teachers in our study says, "We look hard at stereotypes, discussions of genocide and racism. I choose edgy books that will engage all of my students." Implementing a curriculum of this nature requires being proactive in addressing race and embracing racial discussions that emerge naturally. One of the teachers from New York who was part of the study says, "I am unafraid when topics arise naturally and also find ways to bring into discussions in the classroom. So much of the current racial tensions in the nation are because we are frightened to talk about race. We keep ourselves in the dark about it, but things grow in the dark. I allow my classroom to be a place where we shine a light on race and it's a safe place to talk about it. I make it clear that I'm willing to and interested in learning about students from their own experiences and ideas." Several teachers noted the importance of discussing race and really what we call an openly anti-racist curriculum, noting that it leads to a greater sense of resiliency among boys and young men of color and enhanced camaraderie among students. We also believe that it's important to embrace mastery learning principles, not moving forward on material until students have actually gained knowledge of that material, because again, we're concerned about is the accumulation of disadvantage that takes place over time. Embracing critical reflection in the classroom, oftentimes that can be done by journaling, but there's other ways to do that. And using cooperative and collaborative learning, which we know are key tools for fostering a sense of belonging in the classroom for these young boys. Other teaching strategies that we recommend include problem and project-based learning, fostering healthy competition, providing leadership opportunities, structuring success early on, being intrusive, and differentiating learning. So really quickly, in terms of problem and project-based learning, we know that boys are socialized in very different ways oftentimes than their peers. They are given, based upon typical socialization processes, they're given toys that allow them to engage learning in a very active way. So highlighting that learning and really using it as an asset, we believe it's important to embrace project-based learning. We also think it's important to embrace healthy competition in the classroom. So we know that young boys are oftentimes socialized around sports and other competitive activities that teach them that essentially their self-worth is attained through competition. Now, we don't think that that's a message that we want to reify, but we can tap into the notions that they already have around competition and use that. We also think it's important to provide them with leadership opportunities in the classroom that allows them to learn that they can be leaders, especially in environments where they feel that they may not have power and control. We think it's important to structure success early on so that they're gaining and feeling like they're having success, whether it's through tests, whether it's through other learning activities where they're validated early on. That allows them to build a sense of confidence that can then be used to scaffold into other areas. We think intrusive learning practices are important with this population. And we also believe that it's important to differentiate learning and embrace multiple intelligences. So differentiation is an instructional planning and implementation method where educators attend to the diverse needs, interests, learning styles, and abilities of students. There's been a lot of work on differentiation, and a lot of it deals with leveraging learning styles and multiple intelligence that we know that these students bring into the classroom. So in terms of this, we recognize that there are really 4 primary areas that we can leverage that are assets that boys and young men of color oftentimes bring into the classroom. They oftentimes have visual spatial intelligence, so we can embrace the use of graphics, using art as a strategy, using charts, pictures, graphs, video clips to help advance that learning. We also know that this is important because research on male brain learning has shown that boys' brains are best stimulated by visual aids. We know that musical rhythmic intelligence is important with this population as well. This type of intelligence deals with both the production and appreciation of music. Teachers recommended leveraging this asset through chanting, music, and dancing. Now, while dancing is oftentimes cross-listed as a bodily kinesthetic intelligence, we present it here because the exemplar teachers connected it to music itself. Teachers noted that musical rhythmic activities were beneficial as the integration of music maintains high levels of engagement, it allows for authentic expression, and it allows boys to exert natural energies that we think are important for them to do so in the classroom. Bodily kinesthetic intelligence is also important to recognize. So hands-on activities that allow students to engage in movement are really important for this population. As noted by one of the teachers from California, says, accept, plan, and adapt curriculum and discipline practices to fit the energy that male students of color bring into the classroom. Similarly, teachers from California and Florida noted that kinesthetic learning gives boys more hands-on work and gets them moving, and many boys of color learn by doing. They need many hands-on activities that incorporates learning, movement, and opportunities to experiment with guided practice. And the last area of teaching learning strategies deals with linguistic and oral intelligence. And this really is tied to the work, less so from Gardner and more so from the work that's been done by Boykin, which highlights the importance of embracing the oral traditions of these populations and having a strong preference for oral modes of communication. We know that students oftentimes speak frankly, directly, and honestly, and we need to embrace that in the classroom and use that as a way to advance their learning. One teacher from California in our study noted that many children of color come from homes that are far more focused on the spoken word than on the written word. And there's a number of reasons why that occurs. But we can leverage that in the classroom with respect to oral histories, stories, and language as a core aspect of culture and cultural transmission. Lastly, we want to conclude with some classroom management strategies and tactics. These include rejecting socially constructed deficits and fears, employing fair disciplinary practices, maintaining clear and consistent expectations, considering the use of directives, at least initially with this population, and allowing time for brain breaks. We know, again, that these boys are oftentimes pathologized, so it's important for us to reject culturally constructed deficits and fears of them. Specifically, a teacher from California noted that as the instructor, you have to be firm and fair. Sometimes teachers tend to fear African American young men. In the spirit of total honesty, everyone knows that African Americans come in all colors. It often seems that certain young African American males are even more targeted than others. So you can't teach someone who you're afraid of. So we believe that this is important, not just for African Americans, but for our Latino students who are also faced with these same types of stereotypes. Now, this is important because it leads to this next recommendation we have, which means to employ fair disciplinary practices. Educators must be proactive in ensuring classroom management does not stereotype young men of color as being criminals and deviants. Their perceptions are oftentimes, educators we should say, socialized like everyone else's, and that's to perceive them in this way. We know that it's important to embrace this population from a standpoint that does not view and pathologize their actions when they display the actions that are the same as other boys. And for example, one of the things that we know is that oftentimes we'll see two boys, white male boy and a black Latino male boy. They'll engage in the same actions, but their actions will be viewed through a very different lens. One's actions will be viewed, particularly the boys of color, as being aggressive, as being deviant, and as not listening, whereas the same actions can be viewed by white boys and interpreted very differently. And as a result, there's been numerous studies that have shown that when the same action takes place, that boys of color are oftentimes punished for their actions when other boys are not. One teacher from New York in our study stated, "I'm extremely mindful of not disciplining boys and young men of color any differently from my other students. Again, I believe this is something to which we have become accustomed to, and it is important for me to negate this pattern in the classroom." Negating this pattern requires that teachers be consciously aware of their actions. Often this may include reflection upon disciplinary practices and actions, as well as at the day's end. Teachers must consider whether the actions that prompted such discipline were different than other boys, and whether they were responded to with harsher punishment than other boys as well. Our last set of recommendations includes the following. Employ strategies that help to refocus attention in the classroom. Engage non-confrontational tones in the classroom. When you do, and when you have to essentially redirect behavior, it's important to do it in a very non-confrontational way, because the natural response for these boys will be to respond in a way that will essentially escalate. So going to them and whispering them in their ear, pulling them aside, having a very soft conversation with them, but doing so in a non-confrontational way. We also believe in positive reinforcements and allowing a fresh start each day. Each day that they come into the classroom is a new day. They're children. So if there's something that they did the previous day, we shouldn't hold that against them. And lastly, we think it's important to critique them privately and praise them publicly. So if they do something in the classroom, there's something that's not in line with our standards, we do need to address it, but we should pull them aside. We should talk to them quietly. Again, it should be done with non-confrontational tones, instead of calling them out in the classroom in front of their other peers. And we also need to focus on praising them publicly for the good work that they do. This is important to not only breaking it down stereotypes that we may have about them, but also stereotypes that their peers may have about them and that they may have about themselves. So lastly, we'd like to turn it over for a Q&A time, and Dr. Herron is going to begin that by giving you some additional comments.
Thank you, Dr. Wood. So before, the first thing I'll say is as I'm speaking, I'll have you post any questions that you have for Dr. Wood into the chat window. And when I hand the mic back over to him, he will respond to those questions. I do want to take a couple minutes to give you more information about our program, as I mentioned earlier. Again, our program is available via the Center for Organizational Responsibility and Advancement. It is a week-long online certificate training program, and because we believe so deeply in this work, our aim is to really get the training and the information that you're hearing here from Dr. Wood, as well as dive into deeper issues to as broad an audience as possible. We want to support the work of our educators, the good work that they're already doing, by increasing their capacity to facilitate the success of boys and young men of color. There's two ways we can make this training available. One is we have it available at the school level, and this would allow individuals in a district or in a school to have unlimited access to the training, so that an entire school or district would offer the training to all educators available or affiliated with the campus. The school level participation is $2,500 for unlimited access, and we would make the training available for a year. And we also have custom options if there are multiple schools within a district who are interested in participating. In addition, we also have an individual level participation, which is $100 currently. Again, this is for individuals who may not be part of a school that's partnering with the Cora to offer this training on their campus, and yet they feel that this is important work that they want to be exposed to. So individuals can participate in the training for $100. And these pre-launch specials are available through the end of March. And I'm going to go ahead and put a link up here. I put a link to our website, which goes into more detail regarding the training, but I'm also going to put a link up to the webinar special so that you can see that information as well. So as I was talking, I saw a couple questions come up, so I'll read the first question for Dr. Wood. Can you further explain what you mean by intrusive teaching practices?
Absolutely. So, you know, and one of the challenges in doing a webinar like this is there's so much content that we want to provide. So you really got a very 1,000-foot view of this as opposed to, you know, the in-depth level that you would get in the actual program. But in terms of intrusive practices, we're talking about those practices in the classroom that educators employ that basically intrude upon students. So let me give you a reason why this is important. We know that boys and young men of color are oftentimes socialized to perceive certain things as true. One, we know that they're oftentimes apprehensive to seek out help. They're socialized to view help as something that is weak and inferior. So if you have to either ask for help, accept help, or follow through with it, you are taught that as a boy or as a person who wants to be a young man, that you are actually less of a man. We also know that that boys and young men of color are oftentimes taught to view school as a feminine domain, as a feminine activity, and not just a feminine activity, but a white feminine activity. If you look at the typical demographic of a K-12 school teacher, we know that oftentimes the teacher force does not reflect these males. And we know that it's important that at least at some point they see educators who look like them. But if nothing else, we know that it's important for educators to basically counter misconceptions that because they don't see people who look like them, that basically school is not something that the school is not something that they should do. So we think that's important. So because of this help-seeking component of this, we know that it's important to be intrusive. They're going to be less likely to say, hey, I need help. Hey, I'm struggling. So we have to embed that. So if it's important for a student to meet with you, don't just allow it to be something that they have to actually prompt. Instead, require it. You know, require them to conference with you. If you know that students are going to be less likely to raise their hand in classroom, go around and proactively prompt them and actually provide them with that information. So it's practices that don't require students to actually seek out help, but proactively provide them with the support that they need.
The next question we have is from Efren Tovar. Can you go over microaggressions? Absolutely.
So microaggressions, one of the most prolific scholars on microaggressions is Daryl Wing Su. And in fact, if anyone has a chance, you can go on the internet and you can actually get one of the best pieces that he has on this. It's called Microaggressions in Everyday Life. And microaggressions are those subtle, unconscious racial slights and indignations that we give to students. So it's the unconscious things that we oftentimes say to a student and communicate to a student that says to them that that you're a criminal, that you don't belong here, that you're not intelligent, and communicates messages accidentally. So for example, let me give you one common one that you'll see. You'll hear sometimes a young male of color who will present something in class, and the teacher will be surprised and say to them, "Wow, you're so articulate." And in that moment, they've actually microaggressed the student because there was a sense of surprise that the student would be articulate. So microaggressions are those subtle ways in which we communicate those kind of messages to students, either about criminality, about intelligence, about their belonging in a specific site, about their caring about school. And in the program, we talk extensively about the different types of microaggressions that there are. And again, that article that I mentioned would be a really good resource on it because there's 4 main types of microaggressions. There's micro-exclusions, that exclude students from educational opportunities, such as positioning all the students of color in one area of the classroom. I've been to many classrooms where you'll go in and you'll walk in, and all the students of color are sitting together in one group at the back end of the classroom. Obviously, and I'm talking about in classrooms where the seating is specifically assigned. And so those are problems, and it communicates to students that they don't belong. We also know that there are micro insults, the insult student, micro assaults that are more kind of that direct racism, and then micro invalidations, which are some of the most common ones, which really insinuates to the students that they don't belong with it, they're not intelligent, that they don't have anything to contribute. And so one example that we see of this is when there's groups to be chosen. We know that particularly in junior high and high school, when students are allowed the opportunity to be able to choose groups in the classroom, that young males of color, Latino males and Black males are oftentimes the last to be picked, or in some cases not picked at all by their peers. This sends to them a message that they don't belong there, that they're not intelligent. And these messages have a negative effect on their engagement and performance in school.
The next question we have is also from Efren Tovar, asking about the population of Latino students that were included in the study,
okay,
the subgroups and the generation.
Absolutely. So this study focused on educators who had a proven record of success in teaching Black and Latino males. So we've done other studies that have focused on specifically on the students themselves. This study focused on those educators who are nominated by their principals based upon having years of experience in the classroom, and most importantly, a proven documented record of success based upon outcome standards, outcomes in the classroom that showed that they had a success in teaching Black and Latino males. So because this was a national study, because this focused on students in numerous states, again, we mentioned some of the states earlier on, including California, Texas, Florida, New York. We're talking about a very diverse population of Latino students, those of Puerto Rican descent, of Mexican and Mexican American descent, and El Salvadorian descent, and numerous other populations. So now, while we recognize that there are definitely within group differences that require unique approaches, we believe that the underlying principles apply to males of color in general. That being said, we are attentive to and recognize that within groups, within Latinos and within the Black population, there are numerous subgroups, which then when you think about how you apply these strategies, it has to change. So let me give you an example of what that looks like. Culturally relevant pedagogy, right, is a principle. It's something that we know is important. It's something that regularly comes up in the research literature, and it's something that we know that the educators who are exemplar studies recommended as a chief strategy for improving success. However, how that is actually employed is going to look differently when you have students in your class who are of African American descent, who are of East African descent, who are of Dominican descent, who are El Salvadorian, who are Mexican American. So we think that the principles themselves carry over, but we recognize that the strategies themselves play out differently. And these are some of the things that we get into in the actual program itself, because we have to be attentive to this and recognize the unique differences of the populations that we serve.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Wood. And I believe that is all of the questions. So I just want to say one more time, I've posted the link to learn more about our Teaching Boys and Young Men of Color training. In addition, you'll see a link here to gain access as an individual or gain access as a school or district during our pre-launch special, which is going to go on through the end of March. We appreciate and thank you for your attendance. And Dr. Wood has one more thing to say.
And we have this program. This is, of course, our Teaching Boys and Young Men of Color program that focuses on K-12 education. However, we've been doing this work for some time now. We have a similar program that focuses on community college students, where we have partnered with over 35 community colleges across the country that made and have had the opportunity to train nearly 1,000 educators. So we have experience in doing this, and we know the kind of conversations that need to take place to advance equity and student success for our boys and young men of color. Thank you for participating, and we look forward to connecting with you in the future.